Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Good morning. This is Newsline. We're coming to you live on TV1. I'm Sonali Manigabaduge. Now, equal rights, equal access for all. That is what we as a channel, as a network, are striving to achieve for Sri Lanka. Article 12 of the Constitution provides for equality. However, when the Newsfirst the program kicked off several weeks ago, something that we found when we visited from door to door in the most rural of villages was that equality was only a dream for some. Today's topic of discussion is disability rights and what is its role in Sri Lanka and what is the way forward. To discuss all this and more, let me introduce our guests this morning. Dr. Padmini Mendis, she's an advisor in disability and rehabilitation. Ishan Jalil, he's an independent activist when it comes to disability rights. Good morning and thank you for joining us on the show.
Good morning, Sonali.
To start off the conversation, Dr. Mendis, how does the Sri Lankan public view disability rights? Is it viewed as part of mainstream rights?
Well, I would say not adequately. This is increasing. The general public, society at large, they are looking at the rights of people with disabilities, but there is also at the same time a perception that this is a different group in society and therefore they need their rights are different. So there has been a change over the last 10 years, and now that we have there is a greater awareness amongst the general public about disability. So this is increasing this question, that this feeling that people with disabilities are one of us. That is increasing, but far from adequate.
Far from adequate. Okay. So, Ishan, what is your opinion of it? Do you think we're on the right track?
We are progressing, and I know that the progress is slow, but I know we are progressing. So we are on the right track, definitely. And later on in this discussion, we'll be talking more elaborately on the ratification of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But as a disabled person, as a person who was born with a visual disability, I must say that if I look back at my life, in comparison to those days, now society is more conscious about disability rights. People sometimes struggle to whether call us disabled persons or differently abled persons. It's just a matter of identifying the terminology, but generally speaking, we are definitely on the right track. And as Dr. Mendis very correctly said, in the past 10-15 years things have been improving slowly, because even Sri Lanka has Sri Lanka signed the UN Convention in 2007, if my memory is correct, which was a very progressive step towards disability rights.
Dr. Mendis, as Ishan mentioned, Sri Lanka ratified the UN Convention on the rights of persons with disabilities. This was done last month, following the initial ratification in 2007.
The initial signing, yeah.
The initial signing.
Yeah.
What does this mean?
Well, ratification is of tremendous importance to Sri Lanka, because as a member state of the UN, we have agreed to follow this international law, which is the convention, that we will protect the rights of our people with disabilities. And the whole purpose of the convention is to enable people with disabilities to be recognized as equal citizens. We have this feeling that people with disabilities are not quite the same as other citizens. So the convention, or we call it the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, is going to be, we need to have it implemented in Sri Lanka to enable them to be part of our citizenry, really. If I take an example, now if you take education, for example, we have a policy, a written policy that children with disabilities should be educated in the same school system as non-disabled children. They call this inclusive education, that children with disabilities should be. Now, but this doesn't happen in Sri Lanka, whereas with the ratification of the CRPD, we have agreed that all children should be in the same school system. So if we then translate this into our local law, and we have already plans to implement this in Sri Lanka, well, all disabled children will have a better education. And more than better education, there are so many children with disabilities who are not yet in school. They will have the opportunity of having an education. What happens now is parents of children with disabilities recognize that education is very important for their children. So they register their children for school. Children may start schooling, but the attrition, the dropout rate is very high. Children don't stay at school. Now with the CRPD translated into local law, then the school system will have to adapt itself to meet the needs of these children with disabilities in the ordinary classroom. All children will have the same level of education. So that's just an example of how the CRPD translates at grassroots level for in Sri Lanka.
Okay, but Dr. Mendis, doesn't this then have to be sort of introduced to Sri Lankan law by way of enabling legislation?
Absolutely.
And that still hasn't been done?
Well, Sonali, we drafted an enabling law back in 2004.
Right.
Because the CRPD at that time was just a draft in New York.
Okay.
But we had in 2003, the Cabinet had approved a national policy on disability, in which we followed the draft CRPD. The draft CRPD did not change very much in terms of the rights that it encompassed. It was polished up. So we drafted we had a national policy approved in 2003 based on the CRPD, and then Sri Lanka recognized we needed enabling law also at some point. So a committee was appointed and a draft disability rights bill was made to be the local enabling law for the CRPD, but it remains a draft until now. How many years later? 12 years later, it's still a draft. So we have to do a lot of work in getting this enacted and to make the CRPD effective.
Ishan, as a young disability rights activist, what are the challenges you face in this journey?
Challenges are many, but at the same time, as I told earlier, perceptions are getting better. Like say for instance, when I was schooling, I went to St. Thomas's College, one of the most prestigious schools in Sri Lanka. I did rowing as a sport. So when I rowed for school, there were people who were very skeptical about me rowing, me being a disabled person, me being a blind person. They were wondering, okay, how can this boy do rowing, how can he swim? All those questions came into mind, and people told me, so Ishan, don't do rowing and all that. But I ended up doing rowing, and I ended up being the first born blind person in the world to do competitive rowing. So that's one example. And like even in university, like I did international relations as my degree. And when I did international relations, you wouldn't believe me, for the 4 years I studied in Colombo University, due to lack of resources provided to the disability sector in Sri Lanka,
Right.
I did not have a single book in accessible format for me to read, which is not acceptable under any circumstance.
Yeah.
So those kinds of issues are there, and even now, as in those issues still remain, but it is the effort of me and veterans like Dr. Mendis, like it's the collective effort of all disabled people in Sri Lanka and especially with the ratification of the UNCRPD which happened last month, which I must say has a personal significance for me, because when the UN Human Rights Commissioner came to Sri Lanka, Prince Zaid Rad Al Hussein,
Yes.
He met with several civil society organizations, persons from civil society organizations, and I was also present at the meeting. And then I raised this issue with him that the UNCRPD has not been ratified in Sri Lanka, and please take this message to the President and the Prime Minister,
Right.
and all that. And very, I don't know, it's fate, because on the same day, the Sri Lankan ambassador to UN in New York has done the needful to ratify the UNCRPD. So that was quite, that was a pleasant surprise, I would say. So that's exactly why I say like things are moving positive, but I had faced challenges, and even now I face challenges, because when someone sees me for the first time, when they have no idea what I am doing, they would just think, okay, Ishan is just a disability rights activist and that's it. Whereas I I go much further into the field of activism. Say for instance, I am founder and executive director of Action Against Apathy, an organization working on political rights of young people. So just because one happens to be disabled doesn't mean that you have to be cornered or caged or confined into that particular field. You can expand your horizons, and you can, of course, realize your potential.
Right, Ishan, I'd like to I'd like you to elaborate on that question more, but first let's go in for a short commercial break. We're in conversation with Dr. Padmini Mendis and Ishan Jalil. We'll be right back with Newsline.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Rest Vihidana Jivite, weekdays at 8:30 a.m.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Disability rights is what we're talking about today. We're in conversation with Ishan Jalil and Dr. Padmini Mendis. Ishan,
Yes.
before the break, you were saying something very interesting with regard to persons being looked at in a sort of negative sense because of disability.
Yes.
What do you think in terms of the masses, persons with little access to proper education, underprivileged communities who have disability rights, who have disabilities, how do you suppose they could progress in society in spite of the disabilities they face, given the current sort of stigma attached?
Yes, you are chartering into a very interesting territory, I must say, because recently I attended this conference which Dr. Mendis also attended, which was done by the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. There were people from places like Monaragala, Anuradhapura and all these areas, remote areas of Sri Lanka, disabled persons. They explain how stigma affects them. Because there are instances where just because you are disabled, you are not being taken out of the house.
Right.
For fear of being shamed, as in for fear of being shunned by the community. So the community knows that there's a person with a disability, and they would say, okay, this is karma. The parents would have done something sinful in their previous lives. Those are the common perceptions in Sri Lanka, which is very unfortunate. given that Buddhism is the predominant philosophy of Sri Lankan society, because in my honest opinion, Buddhism is a very liberal philosophy which advocates not these kinds of conservative ideology. So that is very disturbing, and there are instances where disabled persons, we talk about all these big rights and all that, but if you go and talk to them, they would say we don't have clean water, we don't have sanitation. Those kinds of things matter a lot to persons with disabilities. And I know recently, a very recent incident about 2 days ago, where this deaf girl with speaking difficulties, that is hearing impaired girl, has been gang raped. In I think Gampaha area, if I am not mistaken. So those kinds of really appalling social stigmas, barriers still exist, especially when it comes to rural areas and as in remote areas of Sri Lanka, with regard to persons with disabilities. But so I think Dr. Mendis can elaborate.
Yes, Dr. Mendis, how do we take disability rights to the rural villages of Sri Lanka?
I'm so glad you asked this question, because this is the priority now. How do we get, because after all 70% and more of our population live outside the urban areas, and they are the ones who are so vulnerable, and poverty is a big problem amongst our disabled people. So this is where the CRPD is so important, and having a local enabling law. But besides that, what we need is a mechanism to implement the CRPD.
Right.
Now, we have 2 years ago a cabinet approved National Action Plan for Disability,
right,
which looks at rights in a very comprehensive manner, looks at it in a cross-sectoral manner, and making it a multi-ministerial strategy that all ministries must have to be included in protecting disabled rights. For example, it's education, or giving jobs, and it's employment and economic development, sports. It's a cross-section of ministries. So then, how do we get rights to our people out in the periphery? Each ministry needs to take responsibility to include people with disabilities in their sphere of activity, within their mandate. And this is what our National Action Plan has foreseen, and has designated various ministries what they should do. But our problem is that we don't have a mechanism to implement this National Action Plan. So in other words, we don't have a mechanism to take these national planned activities to the periphery. This is really important, and the CRPD is important. Again, the CRPD is unique in which because it describes how the CRPD should be taken to the people. In other words, how a mechanism such as take for example a National Disability Commission, which is under the most senior level of government, has the responsibility of getting these actions to the people in the periphery. This is now what we are really looking for as a next step in the implementation of the CBR.
How far away are you from achieving this?
Well, we've just started, because it's only a month ago since we started, but this is very, very important, and this is what we are focusing. Many of us are focusing on now to get the attention of the government that we need this National Disability Commission, say, under the office of the Prime Minister or the President. And if our government is serious about implementing the CRPD, because Ishan mentioned the visit of his meeting with Prince Zaid, the Human Rights Commissioner, and it was interesting because in his final statement to the media, Prince Zaid mentioned this, that he was concerned about the human rights situation of our people with disabilities. So I think we must use that his statement to get our government interested in in being serious about implementing the CRPD, and as a first step set up a mechanism within the government, a mechanism which will have functions for oversight meaning make sure that all the ministries are carried out the tasks assigned to it within the National Plan of Action, and also this mechanism will coordinate the actions of all the ministries to make sure that the convention is implemented in harmony. Because if we, for example, if we just look at educational rights, these children have to get to school, so then they need to use public transportation. So we need to have public transportation accessible to people with disabilities. These children need to be able to use the schools. That means the buildings must be accessible to children with disabilities.
There is a law that stipulates that buildings should now have accessways which permit wheelchair access.
Yes, Sonali.
Is this being implemented?
Well, very unsatisfactory. Because we have this law, and it's thanks to a person with disability himself, Dr. Ajit Pereira, who went to the Supreme Court and got a Supreme Court judgment, a law now that all buildings must be accessible. All new buildings must be accessible to be used by wheelchair users and others with mobility problems, including us elderly people and including pregnant women, for example. So this is a law which came into force last year. Even existing buildings now, since last October, 2 years ago, even existing buildings have to adapt whenever possible where they can and make themselves accessible for the use of the general public, including people with disabilities are members of the general public. But this law is not being implemented. We see buildings coming up, even government buildings coming up now with no attention being paid to the law. This is very, very unsatisfactory, and this is another reason why we need a high-level National Disability Commission or some such, because then they will ensure that the ministry is responsible for construction, for passing even municipalities which approve of the plans for buildings, that they will make sure this is done.
At the present juncture, disability rights falls under the purview of the Ministry of Social Services. Am I right?
Social empowerment and social welfare.
Yes, but actually as it is, there is no concern, I would say there is no thought on disability rights. The Ministry of Social Empowerment and Social Services is very good at delivering services. They do some good work delivering services to people with disabilities. They run 5 vocational training centers where youth with disabilities can go for. They give cash grants to the very poor.
But where does it fall short?
It falls short in the sense that it does not work with other ministries to get rights implemented. It's very much concerned within itself.
Right.
Whereas rights it involves, as I said earlier, multi-ministerial effort.
Right.
And this is where we need a higher level body which can bring all ministries within its umbrella for oversight and for coordination.
There's talk of a third Republican constitution coming into play. Ishan, what do you think in terms of ensuring greater disability rights? Do you think the constitution needs to have an amending provision? I
can actually say with very optimistic thoughts about the future, because me and several other disability rights activists, young people, have been included in the consultative process in making the constitution. So there are many organizations who got together and compiled a document which we handed over about a week ago to the consultative committee on the new constitution. So our voices are being heard, and even in the highest levels, because they actually wanted us to give a document so that the consultative committee can incorporate some of the disability rights into the constitution. So it's actually quite promising.
Okay.
Sonali, this is very interesting because now this is a change that is coming within the last couple of years. The voices of people with disabilities are being heard, and not only just the people who in urban voice,
Yes.
but even the voice of the rural areas. It's because people in rural areas are becoming more, disabled people in rural areas are becoming more conscious of their rights. You know, some of them are getting an education and then they spread the word around. And people in the rural areas, disabled people are getting together, talking about their rights, how they can and get. So the voice of people with disabilities is increasing, but again we need to give a voice to those peripheral areas. 70% of our population, 30% in Colombo, and it's fine if people like Ichan voicing. But some of us feel very strongly is that how do we enable people in the periphery to express their concerns, so we think that a strategy needs to be developed to empower these people. And again, this is in the National Action Plan for Disability. This is one very important area. Go to the rural masses and enable them to voice their concerns. So again, it comes back to a need for a high-level disability commission to put this National Plan of Action.
Thank you very much. Ishan Jalil,
Yes.
we're on our last 1 minute of the show.
Okay.
What is the way forward for disability rights in Sri Lanka?
If the powers, if the higher authorities gets disabled people more into the decision making process, not just about disability but about regional, as in local, national, regional and international issues. If disabled people can be incorporated in the decision making sphere, and if we can think and promote this concept of disability is not inability, then I think Sri Lanka would have a very promising future, given that Sri Lanka is already on the correct path when it comes to human rights and reconciliation. So reconciliation doesn't just mean reconciliation between Sinhalese, Tamils and Muslims. Reconciliation also means reconciling all sectors of society, including persons with disabilities. So that is my positive forecast for the future, I would say.
Great. Ishan Jalil, Dr. Padmini Mendis, thank you so much for being on the show. It was fantastic having you. And with that, we wrap up this edition of Newsline. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. Have a great morning ahead.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.